Welcome everyone to the BERNINA Embroidery Software 8 webinar. Our presenter today is Debbie Lashbrook. Welcome, Debbie.
Thank you, Deborah, and welcome everyone. So Software 8 and your embroidery machine can combine to make applique very easy and very professional. There are two tools in the software for digitizing applique. Plus we have the CutWork feature, and now we have the ability to create SVG files for a cutting machine. So software applique is even better now. During this webinar, you're going to learn some quick and easy applique methods, and then you're going to learn about the advanced applique option as well. There is a handout that goes over all the steps involved, and you'll find that on your welcome screen, and you can just download that PDF file and follow along. So first of all, to talk a little bit about where you can find designs. Of course, we have artwork in the software that is suitable for digitizing applique. You can also draw your own either in the embroidery canvas or in the artwork canvas, and using the drawing tools that are in those. You can scan in applique patterns or books and design from those. Also, coloring books, that's a great source for some ideas for applique. And there are numerous websites that you can look at for color book images that are good for applique. When we talk about the applique tools that are in the software, you will find them in the digitized toolbox. There's applique and there's advanced applique. Now we've had applique since version 5, and that's the advanced applique. And there seems to be a lot of confusion about exactly how it's used. So I want to spend some time in the latter part of the webinar going over the advanced applique tool. In the edit toolbox, we have remove applique overlaps. This used to be called partial applique. So first of all, let's talk about the basic applique tool. And this is the icon that you see here on the slide. The applique tool works with closed objects. And by closed objects, I mean that that object is totally enclosed. It's best with simple, separate shapes, and it works with a cover stitch of either satin or a blanket stitch. And all you have to do is digitize one pass with the applique tool, and up to 4 layers are created with that one pass. You can have a placement line, a cut line, a tack down line, and a cover. The placement line shows you where to place the appliques. The cut line is optional, and that you can use if you place the fabric down and then cut it with a pair of scissors. The tack down secures the edges, and the cover stitch covers up the edges. So when you digitize the shape, you'll be doing left clicks and right clicks. Left clicks make points and turn sharp corners, and right clicks make curves. When you're clicking with the applique tool, it's just like you're digitizing. You want to keep the number of clicks to a minimum. That makes the shape itself smoother. Also, the clicking or the digitizing creates a primary, which is your cover stitch, and also secondary lines, and those are the placement, the tack down, and cutting line that we talked about. Just like with digitizing, you can use the backspace key and the escape key. The backspace key will erase one click at a time, so if you catch yourself that you made a mistake, all you have to do is click the backspace key the number of times according to the number of mistakes you made, and the escape key you use to start over. Keep in mind that it takes 3 clicks to form the shape, so what you may think is not going to work might in the end work. And remember, you always have reshape too. You always want to let the software close the shape with the applique tool just like you do with the digitizing tools. So with reshape, when you select reshape, you can go in and you can add control points, you can move control points, you can delete control points, and you can change control points. So I'll show you a little bit about that when we're actually working in the software. You can adjust the object properties of the applique design either prior to digitizing or after digitizing. The applique style means that are you going to do pre-cut applique? Is the shape going to be cut out? Or are you going to place a fabric down over the placement line and then trim it in place? This is done right here under guidelines. If you want to do trim in place applique, you have to place a check mark in next to cutting line. So the default is for the cutting line to be deactivated. You can also change the width, the stitch spacing, the type of stitch, and the offset. So these are the 4 passes that can be generated with the 1 pass of the digitizing applique tool. You have the placement line, and these have been offset just so that you can see the 4 lines. The placement line shows you where to place the fabric or the cut piece. The purple line is optional, and that's called the cutting line should you choose to take a pair of scissors and cut the fabric after it's stitched. The tack down secures the edges, and then the cover stitch is what covers up the applique piece. Now, if you do trim in place, that's where you'll need to check the cutting line. And here you can see the piece of fabric was laid down over the placement line, and the applique scissors are used to cut close to the fabric edge. Pre-cut applique you would either use with a cutting machine or with the CutWork tool, or if you hand cut your pattern, that's another option. And here you want to place just the check mark by the placement line and not the cutting line. Now you can also change the width of the stitch in the applique object properties, and that is done under cover stitch. And you can see here the width can be changed. When the width is updated, the tack down width is automatically updated. Either it narrows or it widens depending on what you do to the cover stitch. You can also change the stitch spacing, and that's done here under the cover stitch as well. So if you want a more open stitch, you can do that. Or if you want a close together satin stitch, you can do that. You can adjust both the spacing of the blanket stitch as well as the satin stitch. You can adjust the type of stitch as well, and if you click on the drop down arrow here by type, you'll find blanket or you'll find satin. And these are the only 2 types of stitches that can be used with the applique tool. When it comes to adjusting the offset, this is the edge of the outside edge, that is, of the applique piece. And the default is to have the offset in the middle. That means the placement line and the tack down line are in the middle of your satin or your cover stitch. If the offset is set to the inside, the placement line moves further out closer to the cover stitch edge. This is what you would want to set if you're working with a very ravelly fabric, because you want the applique to actually have a bigger bite into the fabric, and this will adjust the bite into the fabric. Now, if you're doing a cutting line and using a pair of scissors to cut, it is better to set the offset to the outside. So here you see the placement line and the tack down line are hovering toward the inside corner, and that gives you more room to cut. It's always hard to cut really close to that applique piece. So by adjusting the offset to the outside, if you trim and don't get close enough, the cover stitch is more likely to cover your stitches. Now you can reshape the applique, and there is a different type of symbol in applique, and this is called the frame out. It's right here close to the applique. What this means is this adjusts the position of the hoop at color stops. So after the placement line stitches, the hoop is going to move out based on where you have that frame out set. Now, back when applique first came about, the frame out was pretty far away from the applique piece, and our machines were smaller there, and we really needed the hoop to move further out. Now that we have more room under our machines, it's not as necessary for this frame out to be placed so far away from the applique. And as a matter of fact, the default is right there on the applique. So the hoop doesn't move out like it used to, but you certainly can move that frame out point if you want the hoop to move further out from your machine. Remove applique overlaps is found in the edit toolbox, and you'll use this when you're using two or more applique objects that overlap. And here the cover stitch is going to be removed from any objects that are underneath an applique that's on top. So cover stitches, whether they're satin or blanket, will disappear after you remove these overlaps. You'll have the placement line, you'll have the tack down line, but the cover stitches will not be underneath those pieces. When you apply remove applique overlaps, you need to select all the applique and then click on the icon, and the software will take care of those stitches that are underneath. Now, one of my favorite tools is the Advanced Applique tool. You can create very complicated designs with the Advanced Applique, and you can create these detailed lines that are stitched within an applique piece, and you can use open objects in this case. In other words, the object doesn't completely enclose. It can be open, an open line, for example. That's how these lines were all created with the Open Object tool. And you're not limited to satin stitches and blanket stitches when you use the Advanced Applique tool. I just want to remind you that you have all sorts of drawing tools in Artwork Canvas. So whether you're working with the basic vector shapes or the object flyout toolbar where you can draw vector images, these lines can be used, or these objects can be used to create applique. Advanced Applique can also be used to split objects. So if I wanted this leaf to have two colors instead of just one, I can use the Advanced Applique tool to create this leaf. I can also use it to create dimension. Now, normally our basic applique tool would only go around the outside edges of this bunny. But with the Advanced Applique tool, we can actually create open objects within the applique design and give the design dimension. And then decorative stitches can be added to Advanced Applique as well. So you have a lot of different pattern stitches that can be used. Some basic rules for using the Advanced Applique. You need to study your design and make sure that you begin digitizing the background objects first and then work toward the foreground. You also need to make sure that areas are properly enclosed, and this involves overlap with the Open Object tools. I'll show you what this means in a minute. Objects can also be placed on top of the applique. As you see here, these spokes were placed on top of the applique. And if you need to reshape, you have to do this before applique is applied, or you will have to recover your original objects if you apply it and then need to reshape. So here's what I mean by insufficient overlap. This is a frame, and it doesn't quite come down here and meet. And sometimes when we're not zoomed in, we can't tell for sure, but there's a gap here and it has to be closed. So what happens when you apply advanced applique is that part of an object has the white hatch marks and the other does not. So if this happens, you have to click on Recover Your Original Embroidery Objects in order to reshape the design. So here I go into Reshape and I'll move that point so it tucks underneath the overlapping applique piece. And then when I apply advanced applique, the white hatch marks are in both objects and I can apply applique fabrics then. Another thing to remember when you're using the advanced applique tool, your digitizing direction matters with your pattern stitches and blanket stitches. So if you want the blanket stitch to point inward, you need to digitize in a clockwise manner. If you want it to point outward, you digitize in a counterclockwise manner. You can also merge fabrics when you are using the advanced applique tool. And what this means is it's going to simplify the shapes. So there are 5 different objects here in the advanced applique pumpkin. And if I merge these fabrics, I can combine all these separate shapes into one shape, and it will be easier for me to cut out and apply the fabric. So here's what it looks like after it's merged. This fabric, the white line, represents my cutting line for the applique piece. And these stitches are done on top to give the illusion that I have 5 small pieces instead of the one large one. Now we cannot pre-select our stitch types when we work with advanced applique. With the regular applique tool, we can set up those stitches in object properties either before we digitize or after we digitize. With advanced applique, these have to be changed after advanced applique is applied. And it is done by clicking on Set Stitch Types manually. And these are the stitch types that can be changed. You can change the color of the placement line and the cutting line. With the tack down, you have more options. Here, you can change from a zigzag or one stitch. You can also change the width of the tack down, the spacing of the tack down, the color of the tack down, and if you're working with a zigzag, you can actually change the offset just like you can with the regular applique. Now, a lot of people have written me about, I've added applique and now my fabric is not showing. So I want to remind you, in your view menu, you have to have this Show Applique Fabrics highlighted, or you will not be able to see your applique fabrics after you have applied them to your applique objects. So always remember to click on that. It is unchecked by default, so you do have to go in and remember to click on it. Now you do have several options for an applique pattern. You can use a printed pattern, you can use the CutWork tool, or you can use an SVG file. So if you're going to print an applique pattern, you want to go into your options and make sure applique patterns is checked, and then it will actually print out the pattern piece that will correspond to your applique. You can also create a CutWork file by going into the CutWork toolbox, and the CutWork is created from a satin border. Then you can also create an SVG file that can be used, for example, with the Silhouette Studio software. Now, the advanced applique lesson that I am using is from the book Table Please by Art to Heart. It's a Nancy Halverson book, and I scanned in the image to use in the software. This was done with the Advanced Applique tool, and I stitched the placement line and then added all my cut pieces over the placement line, and then stitched the tack down stitch, and then finally the cover stitch. And when you are stitching the cover stitch, you will be changing thread colors. The beauty of the Advanced Applique tool is the software figures out how to stitch the placement line and the tack down line with no jump stitches. The only thing you have to do is make sure that you digitize the object from background to foreground, and magically the software figures out all the travel stitches so you don't have jump stitches. When you're stitching the cover stitches, you will have jump stitches, and you will be changing thread colors as well. So let's go ahead and open up the software. And I'm going to start out with just a few basic exercises. These are on your handout. We're going to be, first of all, clicking on the Insert Artwork. And I'm going to navigate to my picture files that are in the software, and Bernina 8 Pictures Artwork folder. And the file that I'm using is called Flower WMF. And I'll click on Open. So we're going to do just a very simple applique shape here. So I'm going to select the applique tool. I'm going to left click. I'm going to left click at the point because I want that to be a sharp point. I'm going to right click at the crest of the curve. I will left click here. Now you can see how that line really didn't shape until my third click. I'm going to do a right click here, a left here, a right, a left, a right, a left, a right, and then I'm going to let the software close the shape by pressing enter. Now, it's not critical that your flower exactly line up with the image underneath because you're not going to be printing that image underneath. But if you do want to reshape, I'm going to press escape and select the object and then click on reshape. So here's that frame out that I was telling you about. Wherever I left click, I have a yellow square. Wherever I right click, I have a blue circle. I can move points, and I don't want to move that, so I'm going to undo. I can delete points by selecting it and pressing delete. I'm going to undo that as well. I can change a point. So if I did a left click and I meant to do a right or vice versa, I select the one I want to change and press the space bar. And again, I don't want to do that, so I'm going to undo that. I can also add a click either by right clicking or left clicking on the line. So there's lots of different things that you can do with reshape. Now I'm going to select this and I'm going to change the color, and I can open up object properties, and here I can go in and I can still change the width of the outline. I can change the offset. I can add a cutting line even if I want to. But what I'm going to do in object properties is actually just add a fabric. So I'm going to click on choose, and I'll drill down to some of the different fabrics. I select the fabric I want, click OK, and click OK again. Now I have Show Applique Fabric highlighted. If I don't have it highlighted, I'm not going to see the fabric. So from this simple applique, now we're going to talk about different ways to print out the pattern piece. At this point, you would save this file as a applique flower, and then we're going to create a CutWork design from this. I'll need to go to the Edit toolbox, and I need to break the applique apart. Applique is a special type of group that has to be broken apart. I create a CutWork file using the satin cover stitch. So I'm going to select the satin cover, and I'm going to copy it, open a new file, and paste it. I don't need my applique fabric, so I'm going to hide it. I'm going to select that satin stitch, go to the CutWork toolbox, and click on Add CutWork Border. I will choose a cut line from the border type. I'm going to create an offset that's -1 millimeter. I'm going to uncheck Include Holes and click OK. And you can see my cut piece over here in color film. Now I'm going to select that satin stitch and press Delete. Now the cut work is still there, but remember, when you're in artistic view, unless you have Show Outlines activated, you're not going to see that cut line. So you'll need to make sure Show Outlines is activated. To add a running before, I'll select the outline, go to the Edit Toolbox, click on Outlines and Offsets. I want Object Outlines unchecked. I want Offset Outlines checked. I want to create an offset of about 1 millimeter. I only need one offset. I want Include Holes unchecked, and I'll click OK. And you can see that outline is right around the cut shape. That helps stabilize the fabric to the stabilizer, and it will create a better cut. I'm going to select that running before because right now it's running after, and I will click on Move to Start. And then this file is ready to save. Now to create the SVG file for a cutting machine, you don't use the satin, but you use the placement line. So I'm going to select the placement line, and I'm going to copy it, open a new file, and paste it. And let me go back. It didn't seem to. So copy, new file, and paste. There we go. With it selected, I'm going to convert that to embroidery. So I'm taking that stitched placement line and converting it to a vector image. And it will take a few minutes to go over there. And then I'll select File, Export. I'll navigate to the file where I want to save it, and I'm going to call this Applique SVG Flower. And I want to select the SVG file, and I'll click Export. In the dialog box that opens up, I just click on OK. Then I'll return to the embroidery canvas, and I can close this file without saving the changes because I have exported the file that I need. Now when I close down my basic applique, I do not want to save the changes because I don't want that applique design broken apart. The next thing we're going to do is use that same flower and remove applique overlaps and make a little bit more complicated design with this. So I'm going to go back to Insert Artwork and select that same flower. And this time I'm going to digitize just around one petal, and then I'm going to use the mirror merge to create all 5 petals. So I'll click on the Applique tool. I'm going to left click. I'll left click, and I'll do a few more clicks here. I'm going to make 3 right clicks around the petal. I'll left click here, right click here, and then press enter. I'll press escape, and then of course I can go in and I can reshape as I did before. When I select the image and choose the color, I'll go to Mirror Merge Toolbox, select Wreath, change the number of wreaths to 5, and then click when it's close to what I want. I do not want to merge. And now I have my flower. Now I'm going to create a flower center and then remove the applique overlaps. To create that flower center, I'll go back to the Digitize toolbox, click on Applique. I can do a different color if I want. And I'm going to right click at 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock, and press enter. You want to make sure that the flower center covers what's underneath. Now I'm going to hide my picture by clicking on Show Bitmap, and I want to select everything. And I'll go to the Edit toolbox and click on Remove Applique Overlaps. And when I click on that, you can see that the heavy cover stitch underneath the flower center has gone away. I can go in and I can add fabrics and do all that as well with this design. Now, before we get to the more complicated advanced applique, I want to show you a very simple way to create advanced applique. And we're going to go over to Artwork Canvas to do this. You've got lots of shapes in Artwork Canvas that can be used to create some nice appliques. So I'll choose my basic vector shapes, and when I do that, the property bar changes. I'll click on the perfect shape icon, and I want to draw a heart. I'll just click and drag to draw my heart, and I'll convert that to embroidery. Now remember, with advanced applique, you can use stitches other than the satin and blanket. I'm going to change the color, and then I'll right click on the pattern outline, and I want to go into Home Deck, and I'll select 407, click OK, and OK again. And now all I have to do to make this into an applique, you see it's just got a cover stitch now. I click on Advanced Applique, and I'm going to add fabric. And I'll come and click, and I now have an applique piece. So I have my placement line, I have my tack down, and I have my cover. Now, if I want to add a cutting line to this piece, I'll come into Set Stitch Types manually. I'll select the heart and place a check mark by cutting line, and you can see I have an extra row of stitching. Likewise, if I want to change my type of tack down, I can do that at this point. So I can't pre-select these, but I can certainly do them after the creation of the applique. I'll click on Back and click on Close, and that is an easy advanced applique. Now we'll do something a little bit more complicated. So here I have scanned the pattern piece in, and I'm going to go over to Artwork Canvas to get it. I could just as easily select Insert Artwork on the embroidery side with this. I'm not going to do anything fancy in Artwork Canvas. I'll click on Insert Artwork and navigate to my Save Scan. Click on Import and press Enter. Now I'll switch to Embroidery Canvas. Now this pattern was created for working with a double-sided fusible. So tracing on the wrong side of the fusible, applying it to the fabric, and then cutting out the pieces and reversing the pieces. So because of that, I am going to select this, and I'm going to click on Mirror X to turn it around, because that's the way it should look when finished. And I want to digitize it the way it should look when it's finished. I also need to choose a larger hoop. This one did work with the MIDI hoop. If you don't have the MIDI hoop, you can resize the image before you digitize. Now I also scanned this in crooked so I could show you how to align. And I'm going to activate the grid and I'll click on the selected art, and then I'll use the grid line to rotate until my line is aligned with the grid. So I'm looking at this line here and I want it parallel to the grid line. That looks pretty good. I'll turn off the grid and turn off the hoop. And now I'm ready to digitize. Now when we use the advanced applique tool, we use either the open object or closed object based on the type of object we're digitizing. We also want to work from background to foreground. So I always think it's helpful to number your pattern pieces. I have numbered them on the handout. The first object that we'll be doing is this Santa beard. Then we'll do the face. Then the mustache is going to go on top of the face. Then the hat. Then the pom-pom. Then the fur trim. And finally the eyes. So for this section, I'm going to need to use the open object because that object doesn't come back and completely enclose on itself. So I'll use the open object tool. I can select my color and I'm going to use the satin stitch. And I will digitize with a little bit of overlap into the adjoining object here. I'm doing left clicks and now I'm going to do some right clicks around here. I'll do a left click here to change direction, come up here with right clicks, and I'll go inside here and press enter. And you can see my white satin line. So the next thing we'll do is the sides of the face. And here I will choose a new color. I'm also going to use the satin outline and I'm going to use the open object. And here there's just a straight line here along one side of the face and another more or less straight line along the other side of the face, and I'll press enter there. Next is the mustache, and this is going to be a closed object tool. So I'm going to select the closed object tool. I'll select white for Santa's beard or mustache, and then I'm going to click around the object. These are mainly right clicks, except here at the point, and where I started, that was a left click. I'll get around close to the beginning and press enter. Now I'm going to press escape because I'm going to apply an effect to this. So I'm going to click on effects and I'll go to textured edge tab, place a check mark by textured edge, and I want both sides, and I'm going to click OK. Gives a little bit of texture, a little bit of interest to the mustache. Now the next object I need to do is this object, the hat actually. So I'll deselect that, select my red. I'm going to go back to the satin and I need an open object for this. And here you can see where the overlap comes into the fur. So I'm going to begin here. These are left clicks and then I'm going to right click. Again, it doesn't have to be exact as long as you like the shape when you're done. That's the main thing. And I'm going to end with a left click there and press enter. And now I will do the other piece. And press enter there. Now if I want to reshape, I can select and click on reshape. And here I can move points, I can change points, I can add points. And so you can do what you need to do to make that the shape that you want. Our next object is going to be the pom-pom, and here I'm going to use the regular closed object tool, the white color, and I'm going to choose a fancy fill, and I chose Ramble, and I'll click OK, and I'll digitize this object with 4 right clicks and an enter. So you can mix closed shapes with your applique as well. Now the final object before we do the eyes is going to be the Santa fur. So I'll select my white. That is going to also be a closed object tool because it's going to go all the way around and enclose all those open objects. And I'm also going to do a textured edge with that, but I'm going to do side 1. And you can pre-select it like I did, or you can change it afterwards. And so here I'm going to start with a left click and then go around with right clicks. This will be a left click to change directions, and then some right clicks. I'll do a left click there and then an enter. And I forgot to change to my satin, so there is my satin stitch. So if you make that mistake too, just change, just select your satin. And I do need to go back into, and I'm going to choose side 2 for that. And then go OK. Now we'll do the eyes, and I'm going to zoom in here, select the ellipse tool. I want to make sure that I have black selected, and I want a satin fill, and I'll draw my circle with 2 left clicks. And unfortunately, I have textured edge applied, so let me go into this and deactivate textured edge there and there. I don't think we need the texture around the eyes. There we go. Now I'm ready to apply the applique. You can see here that there are no placement lines, there's no tack downs, there are only the cover stitches right now. I'm going to hide my bitmap, and I'm going to select everything except the eyes. So I'm holding down the control key to deselect the eyes, and then I will click on Advanced Applique. And you can see that I've got white hatch marks throughout my objects, so I'm not going to need to reshape. If I didn't have something, that means I would have to reshape, and I might need to pull in one of these open objects so that it crosses the overlapped object a little bit more. When I click on Place Fabrics, I'll select my fabrics, and it doesn't matter what order I do this in. I'll just select the fabric, click on the area that I want to add the fabric to. And there were some nice Christmas type of fabrics here in the Benartex Classics. And actually, it's that one I think I chose, yeah. And then when you're done, you click on Back and you click on Close. Now you can see you have a placement line, you have the tack down, and then you have the objects in the order that you digitized. So let's watch this stitch out. I'm going to hide the fabric so that we can see how this stitches. So the first thing that stitches is going to be the placement line, and I'll speed this up a bit. The placement line is going to stitch without a jump stitch. So it travels when it's necessary, and even though I did not digitize any travel stitches at all, the software figured out how to do this without a jump stitch. So this design is going to take less time to stitch out. Now after the placement line is stitched, the machine will stop I'll add all my cut applique pieces, and then the tack down stitches will stitch all around the design. I chose a color of thread that would blend into the background for both the placement line as well as the tack down line. Now the cover stitch is ready to stitch, and here is when I'll have to change thread colors. So there's an underlay that's going to stitch first, and then the cover stitches, and it will finish all the stitching. And finally, the fur will stitch, and then the eyes, and it is all done. So that concludes the lesson on applique. And Deborah, do we have questions?
There actually are no questions.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, so you did an excellent job.
Well, if you think of questions after the webinar is over, you can email either Deborah or myself. Deborah will forward the questions to me, and I'll be glad to answer anything that pops into your mind. I love applique. Applique is a lot quicker than embroidery a lot of times because there's not the high stitch count that you usually have with an embroidered design. So I hope you enjoy using the applique tools in the software. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Debbie, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate the time that you choose to spend with us, and we will see you next time.
And the next webinar will be in December, and the topic is going to be on Corel photo paint. So hope to see you then.